Chapter 521, White Dog and Prince 2. Jiang Li thought for a moment before controlling his clone to jump into the sky and look down. The Buddha demon eyes swept across the entire capital city. Suddenly, his gaze focused slightly. His eyes discovered a few rays of light in the chaotic graveyard outside the capital city. There was something in the graveyard. Jiang Li, who had been waiting for half a month, was instantly excited when he finally saw something decent. It could not be a spirit stone that had fallen into the ground. He would be angered to death. His figure disappeared in the air. When he appeared again, he was already in the graveyard filled with weeds and mounds. A few wild dogs that were digging the ground and searching for bones raised their heads and roared in the direction of the statue clone. However, after seeing the eyes of the Buddha demon, the group of wild dogs immediately whimpered in fear and turned to run. Jiang Li searched for the treasure light and found a mound that had been there for a long time and was almost flattened by the rain. From the looks of it, it had been more than 10 years. Beside this mound, there were many bones that clearly belonged to humans. It seemed that they were dug out by the wild dogs just now and placed here. The wild dogs were worshipping something. He rubbed his hands and suddenly felt like he was opening a treasure chest. Could the thing buried in a desolate graveyard be related to the abnormality of the Kundu kingdom? With a thought from Jiang Li, spiritual chi surged into the ground, and the soil in front of him automatically flipped open. A strange aura immediately spread out. A moment later, a yellow cloth bag flipped out of the soil and landed in Jiang Li's hand. This was all that was buried under this mound. It swayed slightly, emitting some crisp sounds of bones colliding in the yellow cloth. He looked at the yellow cloth again. On it were Buddhist scriptures written in gold paint. If he was not wrong, it should be done by the 8 Paths temple nearby. This was interesting. No one had ever mentioned this to him before. It seems that they are indeed hiding something from me. The blood-colored chaotic power in his hand corroded it and quickly erased the scripture on the yellow cloth bag. He casually opened the cloth bag, and inside was a palm-sized skeleton. However, after carefully identifying it for a moment, he discovered that it was not the skeleton of a human child. Instead, it was a puppy. The 8 Paths temple specially sealed and buried a newborn dog. Wuxia. At this moment, the yin chi of heaven and earth gathered, and a dark light flashed in the puppy's skull. A ferocious soul collided with the head of the statue clone. Fortunately, an attack of this level was no longer effective against Jiang Li. A golden light flashed behind him, and a Buddhist hand reached out and grabbed the soul. A mouthful of teeth bit the Buddha's hand. This soul was grabbed in his hand and was still biting desperately. Om Mani Padme Hum. The divine statue clone shouted the Buddhist mantra. As soon as the Buddhist symbol appeared, it suppressed the evil soul in its hand, causing it to retreat and recover its original appearance. It was a white puppy with soft fur that was only the size of a palm. Even the umbilical cord had not fallen off. This puppy should have been killed as soon as it was born and buried here. Moreover, the white puppy's ears were cut off at the root and disappeared. Clearly, there were some clues. Little guy, who are you? Jiang Li stared at the white puppy for a long time, but did not recognize it. Looking at its soul, the puppy was killed as soon as it was born. It was also trapped here for more than 10 years by Buddhist scriptures. However, not only did its soul not dissipate, the strength of this soul was actually not inferior to a cultivator at the soul formation realm. In fact, it was even stronger. If not for the fact that it did not have any strength and was ignorant, Jiang Li would probably not be completely confident in taking it down. He used appraisal, but unfortunately, the results were white puppy's bone and white puppy's soul. Below were a bunch of question marks that had no actual value. He transformed into a flexible 9 nether vine and wrapped it around the puppy's neck. Jiang Li brought it and its corpse towards the palace of the Kundu kingdom. This kind of thing was buried outside their capital city for less than 10 years. Jiang Li did not believe that those royal families did not know. In the blink of an eye, the divine statue clone controlled by Jiang Li had already arrived in the palace. The trembling king and queen were invited, out of their beds, and walked into the main hall with terrified expressions. When they saw the statue clone, they immediately wanted to bow. However, they immediately noticed a yellow cloth and a pile of bones on the long table. The pupils of the two most powerful people in this country constricted, and the panic on their faces could not be concealed. "Looks like you know it. We were benevolent and did not use the soul-searching technique on you. In exchange, you deliberately hid the truth and let tens of thousands of cultivators waste half a month here. As the king, what kind of punishment do you think you should receive? Throw your souls into the flames to burn for 100 years or 1,000 years." Jiang Li's half-Buddha and half-demon face calmly recounted such things. He was not scaring the other party. He was just the king of a mortal country. There was no need for Jiang Li to personally do anything. As long as he showed any displeasure, a large number of cultivators would come and take their heads. As the price of deception, no one would feel anything wrong if Jiang Li killed them. The king and queen immediately kowtowed as if they were pounding garlic. Soon, their foreheads swelled up and blood began to seep out. Even if they were usually pampered, they did not dare to be dissatisfied at this moment. This was because the person in front of them could change their dynasty with a word. "Tell me what's going on." After a long time, Jiang Li used his fingers to knock on the table, and only then did the two of them stop as if they had been granted amnesty. After a pause, the king spoke about the secret in the yellow cloth bag. It's a monster. 13 years ago, on the night of the birth of my child by the previous queen, this white demon was born together with my first son. The king of the Kundu kingdom had an ugly expression as he personally recounted the past that he had strictly ordered to keep quiet. Or rather, it was a scandal. Every time he mentioned that puppy and his first son, his voice would subconsciously lower, showing a very resistant mentality. It was no wonder that he did not say this earlier. Jiang Li became energetic when he heard this. The together in his words did not refer to the same time, but in the same space. It turned out that this king had a previous queen. That queen was once 8 years and 3 months pregnant. On a rainy night 13 years ago, she gave birth to 2 children. One of them was a prince covered in ugly black patterns. The other was the white puppy that had already turned into bones. It was strange to be pregnant for 8 years and 3 months. Even Li Jiang, who was clearly a cultivator, could not accept such a thing. In the end, they even gave birth to a dog fetus from a human body. Such a situation was vile, even worse than a demon replacing a prince in the womb. It was naturally impossible for this king to think that it was his fault. Since it was not his fault, it must be that the queen had acted improperly and provoked the invasion of the demons. The queen giving birth to a dog fetus was no different from a scandal to the royal family. If word got out, there would be all kinds of inhuman rumors about the king the next day, and it might even cause a rebellion. Even if he did not consider this king would not want to look at a woman who had given birth to a dog. Therefore, although the fate of that queen was briefly mentioned by the king, it was obvious that it must have been terrible. Later on, the king of the Kundu kingdom even paid a huge price to invite the monks of the 8 Paths temple to deal with this matter for them. At that time, this white dog was killed and sealed and buried in the graveyard. As for the prince who was born from the same mother as the white dog, he still looked human. In the end, he was spared. However, every time he mentioned that son, the reluctance in his tone let Jiang Li know that the prince had not ended up well. Chapter 522, Sufferer Q Shui 1. Bring me to see that son of yours. Whether it was a human, ghost, demon, or devil, he naturally had to see it with his own eyes to confirm. Moreover, it was born with this extraordinary white dog. If it was not a melodramatic plot like the Minotaur, then it might be a companion spirit pet similar to a life companion artifact. There were all kinds of strange things in the world, right? When he heard Jiang Li's order, at the moment of life and death, this king no longer cared about the royal family's reputation or his own feelings. He did not dare to hesitate at all, and brought Jiang Li towards the dungeon below the palace. Due to Jiang Li's order earlier, in order to gather 1,000 souls, all the prisoners in this dungeon had been executed. The dungeon became empty for once. The old king entered one of the cleaner cells. After removing the straw on the ground, a wooden trapdoor appeared below. On the trapdoor, Buddhist scriptures were also written. It was these scriptures that covered the eyes of the hidden rock cultivators, preventing them from discovering it. It seemed that after this time, he had to find a probing spell technique for the people below to learn. Otherwise, he really could not do such a small thing well. Jiang Li pulled open the trapdoor and followed the king inside. Under this dungeon, there was a hidden dark cell modified from a sewer. On the ground here, a layer of dirty water that reached the ankles was slowly flowing, indicating that this section of the sewer was still in use. A few fat rats were not afraid of living people at all. They crawled leisurely in the darkness. It was not until a ball of spirit fire lit up in Jiang Li's hand that they were frightened to the point of running to a corner and burrowing into a hole to escape into the other sewers. Urgh! The king beside Jiang Li had clearly never been here before. He could not endure the stench in the environment and directly bent down to vomit. This environment did not seem like a place where a person could survive. However, Jiang Li could hear faint panting not far ahead. With the help of the flames, Jiang Li saw clearly that at the end of the sewer cell, a thin figure was sitting upright in a rusty iron cage. In such an environment, ordinary people would be locked up here for a month or so. Even if they were lucky enough to survive, their bodies would be crippled. There were actually mortals who could grow up here. Lord, that's my unfilial son. He hasn't died in 10 years. He's indeed a monster. Back then I was soft-hearted and spared the life of my unfilial son, making a huge mistake. Now, I'll let Lord Immortal Master punish this child. This king's mouth was still filled with disgust and rejection. Even if this son was only alive, it still made him feel uncomfortable. He should be feeling depressed. Why was this monstrous son still alive? Even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs, but this king's mannerism was terrifyingly disgusting. Jiang Li temporarily resisted the urge to slap him to death, and he raised the spirit fire and walked over to the iron cage. In the cage sat a youth covered in mud and only a rag. The youth's hair was disheveled and his face was dirty. There were many scars on his body that had been bitten by rats. He was skin and bones, especially his left leg, which was deformed. It was as if the leg of a 3-year-old child had grown on a 13-year-old youth. Although Jiang Li was not a medical cultivator, he could still tell the reason for this abnormality with a single glance. On the youth's left leg, there was a very small metal shackle that was tightly holding his left leg. There was no room for blood circulation at all. According to the king, this youth was now 13 years old and had been locked up here 10 years ago. In other words, 10 years ago, when this youth was 3 years old, he was put on an ankle chain and stuffed into a cage. Because he was bound, he could not grow and eventually became deformed. It was hard to imagine how much pain this youth had endured in these 10 years. At this moment there was a rustling sound. A moment later, a pile of wild vegetables, shattered bones, and swill flowed to the side of the iron cage. It turned out that there was a hollow bamboo tube beside the iron cage that stretched down from somewhere above. Every few days, when the higher-ups recalled it, they would pour some leftovers into the bamboo tube. Perhaps to the higher-ups, this bamboo tube was just meant for waste discharge. This youth had relied on the leftovers to survive until today. This kind of suffering was shocking. At this moment, one of the Buddha hands of the divine statue clone moved, and the white dog soul that had already become obedient struggled again. When Jiang Li saw that it was not ferocious, he tried to let go. The white dog soul jumped to the water surface and sniffed the surrounding environment. Soon, It was attracted by the youth in the iron cage. After running a few steps forward, its illusory body passed through the iron cage and entered the thin prince's arms. The youth finally moved at this moment. His eyes were almost pure black. He had stayed in the darkness for 10 years but had not lost his vision. He reached out and hugged the puppy's soul, as if he was gently stroking it. Not only could he see, but he could also see souls. Jiang Li was already certain that the person in front of him was the source of this country's uniqueness. He could see that there were no signs of cultivation on the other party's body, but there was an extremely dense and pure spiritual qi hidden in his body. If he had not consumed a natural treasure like the 9 nether earth fruit, then the spiritual qi of heaven and earth must have spontaneously gathered and fused into his body. Chapter 523, Sufferer Q Shui 2. Not only that, but even in this smelly sewer cell where the environment was dirty and disgusting, the concentration of spiritual qi was more than 5 times that of the outside world. This was something that many spirit gathering arrays could not do. However, just because a person was sitting here, the surrounding spiritual qi spontaneously became dense. This was simply ridiculous. This person's talent was absolutely unprecedented in Jiang Li's life. If he were to step onto the path of cultivation, it would be conservative to say that he could advance by leaps and bounds. Even if Jiang Li cheated, it was hard to say if he could surpass the other party. Thank you for bringing Shanting back to me. The youth in the cage sat in the dirty water and bowed to Jiang Li. As soon as he spoke, the king of Kundu, who had been hiding at the entrance, was shocked. He cried out and crawled away. After being locked in this sewer cell for 10 years, not only was this guy not dead, he could speak clearly and fluently even though no one had ever taught him the language. In the eyes of ignorant mortals, if this was not a demon, what else could it be? Therefore, the king of Kundu fled. However, the problem was that after that guy climbed up, perhaps because he was too afraid or because he was doing it on purpose, he actually closed the trapdoor. Wasn't this imprisoning Jiang Li below? For a mortal to do such a rude thing to Jiang Li, regardless of whether it was intentional or not, he was digging his own grave. The spiritual fire in Jiang Li's hand erupted, and he was about to rush out of the cell and burn the king to ashes. However, at this moment, the youth stopped him again. Benefactor, please forgive my father's rudeness. I Q Shui am willing to suffer for him. There was determination in his weak voice. This youth actually did not have any hatred in his heart. Instead, he was willing to sacrifice his life for such a guy. Jiang Li paused for a moment and did not persuade the youth further. He did not argue with the youth about who was right or wrong. In the cultivation world, right and wrong were never the most important things. With a thought, the surging flames returned to Jiang Li's hand. Next, the bright liquor fire spirit flame in his palm turned into a pale ghost lantern fire. Jiang Li reached out and handed the ghost lantern cold flame to the other party. Are you sure about enduring the suffering for him? The young man smiled. Suffering is my fate, thank you for your understanding. The youth, who called himself Q Shui, did not hesitate at all and actually stretched his right hand into the cold flames. He really wanted to repay evil with kindness and endure the suffering of the perpetrator. However, what surprised Jiang Li was not this, but that the other party's soul was not burned by the flames. This meant that the other party was not possessed by an expert. If the soul was possessed and reborn through the womb, the soul and body would definitely be unable to completely fuse together. When burned by the ghost lantern cold flame, a flaw would be revealed. Only a completely compatible body could protect the soul from the ghost lantern cold flame. Since it was not possession, without reincarnation, theoretically speaking, no one should be able to awaken their previous life's intelligence. This was because they did not have a previous life in the first place, so how could they awaken? Unless he was an extremely rare situation that was often talked about in the cultivation world. Reincarnation of an immortal or Buddha. Jiang Li himself had been thought to be the reincarnation of an immortal or Buddha countless times. It was said that such a situation had also appeared in the even wider Azure Cloud continent's central region. He was not sure, but the expression in his eyes became more and more serious. Qiu Shui, is this the name you gave yourself? The youth nodded and began to stroke the soul of the white puppy in his arms. You've been here for 10 years. That suffering shouldn't be borne by you. Are you willing to leave this place with me? When Jiang Li saw such an existence, not to mention the backup clone of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, he had to pull him back no matter what and feed him a 9 nether earth fruit first. However, his suggestion to save Qiu Shui was rejected by the other party. Benefactor, you're wrong. Everyone in the world suffers, but no one can escape. The taste of suffering is something that even I can endure. I am not afraid of the pain of the body and mind. I am only willing to stay here and quietly think of a way to save the suffering ones. Thank you for your concern, benefactor. If there are more people like you in the world will be at peace. The youth, Qiu Shui, did not feel upset about his miserable life. The words he said were even more benevolent, like an accomplished monk. He raised his eyes to look at Jiang Li, and he actually seemed to have seen the virtuous spiritual light on Jiang Li's main body through the divine statue clone, and actually nodded in approval. Jiang Li raised his brows. The person sitting in front of him did not look like a youth who had suffered for 10 years. Just this bearing was enough for him to talk on equal status. Perhaps this Qiu Shui was the reincarnation of a Buddha. Jiang Li controlled himself from having the thought of killing him in advance. He had a feeling that as long as he thought about it, the other party would be able to tell. However, he still had to take him away. Little brother Qiu Shui is dedicated to saving the suffering. I admire your ambition. However, this prison is empty, and the suffering has been resolved. There's no point in brother Qiu Shui staying any longer. It just so happens that I know a place with endless cries day and night. It's as bitter as the abyss of hell. I wonder if brother Qiu Shui is willing to go there. You can save them from their suffering. Buddhist cultivators were different from ordinary cultivators. They needed to cultivate their mental state and maintain the Buddhist heart. Once one confirmed their faith, no matter how ridiculous it was, there was often no turning back. Once he had doubts about his beliefs, it was not impossible for his beliefs to collapse and his cultivation to disappear. He might even die on the spot. Suffering hardships and saving the world made him look like a masochist and a fool. However, when the other party suffered while quickly becoming stronger, they would know what great wisdom was. Who was really stupid? Therefore, Jiang Li did not intend to persuade the other party to change his mind at all. That would not be saving him, but stopping him from achieving the path he strode. They were irreconcilable enemies. However, against such a person, as long as he followed the other party's words, the effect would be much better. Sure enough, when he heard that there was more suffering that he had to face, Qiu Shui's originally determined expression immediately changed. Benefactor, please lead the way. I will not hesitate no matter the difficulty. That's good. Jiang Li waved his hand, and the iron cage that trapped Qiu Shui immediately shattered into pieces. The chains that bound his left leg also easily broke like paper. Then a lotus platform appeared beneath the two of them, dragging them through the palace and flying into the distance. The gate of hell rose from the ground. Not only did the sinister aura emitted from it not make Qiu Shui feel fear, but it also made his gaze even more determined. That place seemed to be more suitable for him. The two of them entered. The hidden rock cultivators and the people of the prosperous Jianghong Inn also entered in a single file. Then, the gate of hell fell. In just a moment, everyone disappeared from this territory. At the same time, in a temple 500 kilometers away, an old monk was lying on the ground with his butt raised. He was listening carefully to something with his ear close to the ground. A moment later, the old monk sat up from the ground. One could see that there was a white dog ear stuck to his ear. The people from the Great Mountain Alliance have left. They took away that strange child. Is there any secret about that child? The old monk muttered to himself. At the same time, he took off the dog's ear. A line of blood immediately flowed out from the ear hole. It dripped to the ground and quickly formed a pool of blood. However, the old monk did not care. He only put the dog ears into a wooden box. In the wooden box, there was another white dog ear lying quietly. One of the two dog ears had the word Shan on it, and the other had the word Ting. Good treasure, they've already left. No one will snatch you away. The old monk hid the wooden box and returned to his meditation mat. Earlier, he had used a dog ear to eavesdrop on the commotion 500 kilometers away and injured his essence soul. Not long after, it was already unknown. However, what he did not know was that a treasure-hunting rat had already sneaked into the Eight Paths Temple. Chapter 524, Northern Profound Hall Master 1. In Fengdu Ghost City, Jiang Li controlled the divine statue clone to fly above the city with Qiu Shui. Qiu Shui, who was flying for the first time, also showed his nervousness and curiosity at the right time. This performance made Jiang Li feel slightly relieved. At the very least, this person was still a crippled mortal without the strength to truss a chicken. Apart from his persistence towards suffering and his extraordinary mental state, he also had human nature and heart. Flying at high speed would make his single leg unstable. The bustling city below would also make his heart, which had never left the sewers, palpitate. As long as he was a mortal, there was a chance. However, soon, a compassionate expression appeared on Qiu Shui's face. His pitch-black eyes looked down. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the bustling surface of the ghost city and see the crowded Fengdu prison below. Those painful voices seemed to be telling him that that was where he should stay. The karma-cleansing lotus lowered its height and entered the underground ruins of the Jiang Li Palace through the hidden passageway. The magnificent palace and ancient flag stood firmly in this unknown space. In front of them, they quickly saw an inverted tree growing upside down. The 9 nether clone who had taken root in Fengdu City lived quite comfortably. It was not inferior to the space in the coffin. Brother Qiu Shui, that's the core spiritual wood of our Fengdu City. It can grow a rare spiritual fruit. Your body has been malnourished for many years. One pill might be able to heal your body. Jiang Li pointed at his clone and introduced him. Qiu Shui, whose eyes were pitch black, raised his eyes to look at the 9 nether wood. Regarding this huge tree that was growing in reverse, there were still 2 huge trees sitting with their backs facing the statue. His eyes revealed a sense of familiarity and 2 doubts. This tree, what's its name? I think I saw it a long time ago. As for the 9 nether clone, who was sleeping on the spot and refining the 9 nether spiritual qi, he felt a chill and woke up. He felt a very annoying gaze. The eyes of the statue on the tree opened. Following the gaze, it looked back and met the pair of pure black eyes. Immediately, the entire tree shook. What did I bring back? From the instincts of the 9 nether branch, a desire to kill the other party arose. At the same time, he had the urge to run. It was as if he had seen an irreconcilable enemy. The 9 netherwood clone would not have such a huge reaction when he first saw the ghost lantern fish. Now he actually had such strong emotions towards a mortal. Jiang Li naturally sensed the change in the 9 nether clone. That instinct of hatred and fear seemed to be inherited from the 9 nether main branch. Although the spiritual root, 9 nether wood, had its intelligence forcefully erased, its many years of memories had already turned into instincts and been passed down. This was the first time the current Qiu Shui had left the sewer cell. It was naturally impossible for him to interact with the 9 nether wood in the netherworld. He did not have the ability to cause such a huge psychological trauma to one of the 10 great Khanate spiritual roots. Then perhaps Qiu Shui's previous life had done something wrong. The reincarnation of Qiu Shui had done something very overboard to the 9 nether wood in ancient times. As a result, the 9 nether wood lineage left behind a deep hatred that they would never forget. he might be involved in removing the intelligence of the 9 nether wood and transforming it into the framework of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Through the eyes of the divine statue clone, Jiang Li looked at the thin youth standing on 1 foot beside him, and he confirmed the identity of the other party's reincarnation. This guy was an impressive figure in his previous life. A guy who could cross the long cultivationless age and leave behind a trace of himself was definitely not a nobody in ancient times. The orthodoxy was related to enduring and saving suffering. It was very familiar with the 9 nether wood or the netherworld, and it was a Buddhist mighty figure. Moreover, he had a dog called Xianxia. Could this guy be that person? Master Ananda, why are you looking at me like that? Don't worry, before saving the ghosts in the dungeon, I won't give up. Qiu Shui's expression was abnormally firm. He could not wait to find the entrance to the Fengdu dungeon. Jiang Li withdrew his gaze in embarrassment. A 9 nether earth fruit flew over from ahead and was caught by a Buddhist hand. In his mental world, the 9 nether clone was shouting, "Don't come over." He was still very resistant to the crippled youth. Jiang Li naturally could not make things difficult for himself. After catching the 9 nether earth fruit, he flew down. However, looking at the earth fruit in his hand, he suddenly felt that this thing might not be useful. Controlling the lotus platform to land in front of the 5 halls in the center, the lotus platform phantom disappeared. Qiu Shui's single leg felt the coldness of the stone slab on the ground. He, who was even worse than a beggar, looked out of place in this ancient palace. These 5 halls were originally the Central Jade Hall, Eastern Green Hall, Southern Flame Hall, Western White Hall, and Northern Profound Hall. Later on, the hall in the middle was shattered by Jiang Li and became the Human Emperor's Hall after recognizing him as its master. The City Lord's stone monument inside allowed Jiang Li to easily subdue many ghost kings and strengthen Fengdu City. Apart from that, there were also 4 halls that did not have a hall master yet. Chapter 525, Northern Profound Hall Master 2. At this moment, the door of the Northern Profound Hall opened automatically. Light and shadows appeared inside, showing the scene of thousands of ghosts enduring the scorching torture of the blade in the Fengdu dungeon. Inside, scorching blades grew everywhere. Countless ghosts were cut and burned like butter. Due to the opening of the gate of hell, the speed at which Fengdu City gathered the ghosts was more than 100 times faster than before. A large number of disobedient ghosts needed to be properly modified in this Fengdu City dungeon before they could become new residents. Attracted by the scene, Qiu Shui jumped into the Northern Profound Hall with difficulty. Whoosh, another figure with chains around his waist, slowly walked out of the main hall. The pitch-black chains dragging on the ground would automatically extend as he walked. They would not affect his movements at close range. Brother Qiu Shui, the people of the world are all bitter. There's life, there's suffering, and there's calamity after death. There's never any hope of happiness in the afterlife. How miserable is that? I am the city lord of Fengdu City. We are fated to meet here. Are you willing to stay and help me? I'll help the human race survive the calamity, and you'll eliminate the calamity of ghosts after people die. Jiang Li's main body dragged the dragon imprisoning lock and personally arrived. He brought Qiu Shui to watch the tragic scenes and handed a dagger to him. The youth, Qiu Shui, looked at the divine statue clone behind him and then looked at Jiang Li before him, and he seemed to have already seen through a little of his background. However, the dazzling glow of Merit's spiritual light on Jiang Li's body was clearly very convincing. He hesitated for a moment before taking Jiang Li's dagger in the end. He cut open his palm and pressed it on the Northern Profound Stone Monument. As the blood seeped in, the Hall Master's stone monument immediately emitted a bright light. Qiu Shui's name appeared at the top. Then, an indistinct shadow appeared above the Northern Profound Hall. The entire Fengdu City began to tremble violently. The last time he had such a reaction was when he, the successor of the Human Emperor, refined the Fengdu City Lord's stone monument. The commotion caused by the young man was actually not any smaller than that time. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth and the yin qi of the netherworld spontaneously gathered towards Fengdu City. The already wide Fengdu City expanded again, actually doubling in size. This was more or less a little ridiculous. When Jiang Li did this back then, he had directly exhausted most of the energy in the coffin. However, the current Qiu Shui had only become the Hall Master, but he had already achieved such an effect. It was really unbelievable. Jiang Li ran out of the northern profound hall and glanced at the phantom floating in the sky above the hall. His brows raised repeatedly. Although his face could not be seen clearly, it was confirmed. Jiang Li also sensed that another shocking force was flowing to him from the northern profound hall. After the northern profound hall had an owner, he probably gained a few more benefits. When he was in Fengdu City, the strength of the city he could mobilize doubled. When the northern profound hall master became stronger, he could use the northern profound hall to obtain a portion of the other party's cultivation. In addition, the northern profound hall would also begin to accumulate strength. Now, he could extract the power of the northern profound hall at any time to strengthen himself. According to the hall master, the buffs he received were also different. He tried to mobilize the power of the northern profound hall to augment himself. Received the main feedback of the northern profound hall. Added status, immovable earth treasury. Immovable earth treasury increases all attribute resistances by 200. When your status is below 50%, activate the earth treasury's one-colored Buddha light protection. When your status is below 25%, activate the earth treasury's three-colored Buddha light protection. Duration, 30 minutes, minus plus. Gasp, all attribute resistances increased by 200. Jiang Li temporarily did not understand what the Buddha light protection was. However, this did not stop him from decisively changing the duration to infinite. Little brother Qiu Shui had actually only become the hall master as a mortal, yet he could bring Jiang Li such a powerful buff. If he became stronger after cultivating, would it bring him and Fengdu City stronger? The treasure he had picked up this time was really a little big. Jiang Li was even worried that this treasure was too big and would crush him to death. After all, he was the reincarnation of that person. Although it seemed that he did not have the memories and strength of that time, Jiang Li could not let his guard down. He let out a breath. However, since the kid had already become the northern profound hall master, at the very least, he could not escape Fengdu City's control before the other party became a true immortal or Buddha. If he completely repaired Fengdu City, even immortals and Buddhas would not be able to erase the name on the stone monument. Congratulations on becoming the Northern Profound Hall Master. From today onwards, the Fengdu dungeon will be managed by Hall Master Qiu Shui. Your burden will be heavy in the future. As the city lord, this is my gift to you. Jiang Li handed the 9 nether earth fruit and a Buddhist scripture to the other party. Qiu Shui did not even look at the 9 nether earth fruit. His eyes were staring fixedly at the scripture in Jiang Li's hand. After receiving it solemnly, he even forgot to thank Jiang Li. He sat on the ground and hugged the scripture to read. At times he would frown in deep thought. At times he would laugh loudly. At times he would be solemn. And at times he would be enlightened. Buddhist scriptures were clearly to his liking. Accompanying Qiu Shui's expression was his cultivation aura. Qi refinement level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 6, level 9. In the blink of an eye, he broke through to the foundation establishment realm. His Dao foundation was forged. He held the void core. He turned the void into true. He refined it into the golden core. He shattered his core and formed his nascent soul. Chapter 526, Northern Profound Hall Master 3. A golden nascent soul muttered scriptures in front of Jiang Li. In just 8 hours, the spiritual qi that was originally entrenched in Qiu Shui's body turned into true cultivation. It was not until he became a golden body nascent soul that this exaggerated speed barely slowed down. However, what Jiang Li gave him was not a peerless secret manual, but only benevolent travel temple's entry-level scripture, the wisdom scripture. At this moment, he still had more than half of his spiritual qi left. Sure enough, only 2 days later, Jiang Li helplessly looked at the golden light that shot into the sky in the northern profound hall. Little brother Qiu had already reached the soul formation realm. Although this speed relied on the spiritual qi of heaven and earth entrenched in his body, it was still shocking. After digesting 10 years of spiritual qi, Qiu left the northern profound hall and plunged into the Fengdu prison. His cultivation would probably advance by leaps and bounds. Perhaps he would directly become an earth immortal at any time. If I don't go to hell, who will? Only that Bodhisattva Ksiddhigarbha can turn suffering into strength. Jiang Li withdrew his gaze and sighed with emotion. Although he had the first 10 years as a foundation, in just 2 days, he had transformed from a sickly prisoner to a powerful soul formation cultivator. If it was in the outside world, it would scare people to death. As the hall master became stronger, the power provided to him by the northern profound hall also rose. The status of the immovable earth treasury had been updated several times. Apart from the fact that his resistance to all attributes had already reached 500, there was also an additional line. When his status was less than 10%, the 5-colored Buddha light protection would appear. If Jiang Li faced the poison domain again, he would probably not die even if he stood there without moving. The power of the northern profound hall master is extremely compatible with the palm meditation technique. If there's a chance, I can send him to the benevolent travel temple and comprehend the palm meditation technique. Jiang Li turned around and looked at the treasure-hunting rat in front of him. At this moment, the original rat had already transformed into a hunched old man who respectfully handed a box to Jiang Li. The treasure-hunting rat that had once eaten a 1-patterned 9 nether fruit was even stronger than before. It could easily bite through most sect array formations and silently hide among the experts. As long as there was no earth immortal, even Jiang Li's Bodhisattva Heart Sutra could not find any traces of it. Previously, after Jiang Li discovered what the 8 Paths Temple had done in that country, he suspected that some key things had already been taken by those monks. However, as a member of the Divine Judgment Hall, he could not directly snatch it. He changed to a gentle method and released the treasure-hunting rat. After spending a few days, it successfully brought back this box. After removing the seal on the box, what was inside was a pair of white dog ears that had already been refined into artifacts. Just by looking at them, Jiang Li understood that these were the ears cut off from the puppy, Xianxia. They emitted a dense, ominous aura, but their grade had clearly reached the earth rank. The ears of this puppy could refine artifacts that reached the earth rank. If Qiu was the reincarnation of Ksiddhigarbha, then could the white dog that reincarnated with him be his former pet, the legendary divine beast, Diding. That was a terrifying existence that could hear the entire 3 realms and 6 paths. If it was really the reincarnation of that divine beast, it was reasonable for its ears to reach the level of an earth-rank artifact. He just did not know how this pair of ears would benefit his Bodhisattva Heart Sutra's sound world technique. He placed a pair of dog ears on his ears. Immediately, thousands of noises sounded. Chapter 527, Long Fall 1. It was as if 1,000 bells and drums were ringing in his ears at the same time. Around him, the chaotic voices from an unknown distance overlapped, causing his eardrums to hurt and his head to hurt. This was only in the relatively empty and lonely netherworld illusion. If it was the continent of the 9 provinces, the sound that was everywhere could really pierce through one's brain with just sound. Even if Jiang Li used the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, the situation was only slightly better. He could barely recognize some of the thousands of voices, but he was still unable to eliminate the chaotic and terrible influence. Jiang Li was not in a hurry to remove the dog ears. While enduring the noise that was enough to make people go crazy, He pondered why such a situation had happened. This artifact was tainted with an ominous aura because of the material. If he forcefully used it, it would cause damage to his hearing and subtly affect his mind. In the Eight Paths Temple, the original owner of this ear had been affected for a long time. When he did not use the dog ears, his own ears were almost useless. Moreover, his essence soul was injured and weak. This was why he did not discover that the treasure-hunting rat had easily stolen the wooden box from his arms. However, without considering the side effects, the effect of this pair of dog ears should not be much reduced. If even his Bodhisattva Heart Sutra could not accept the voice coming from the ears, then it was even more impossible for others. A useless item, even if it reached the earth rank, was useless. It would not be treasured by the Eight Paths Temple. In that case, perhaps he had used it wrongly. He touched the furry dog ears and pondered. In the scientific explanation of his previous life, sound was a form of vibration. The transmission of vibrations could roughly be divided into three methods: solid, liquid, and gas. Although it could travel through the three mediums, the exact situation was completely different. Jiang Li's Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was not afraid of this, but this pair of ears might not be so smart. Perhaps this was the problem. If it was not through gas transmission, then perhaps he could try another medium. In his guess, chanting was very likely the reincarnation of Diding. The divine beast, Diding, could also be called Earth Listener. When it used its ability, it had to stick its ear to the ground and rely on the transmission of the ground to hear the three realms. He raised his hand and formed two seals. Two rock pillars immediately surged out from the ground. They were large at the bottom and small at the top, and they stretched to the sides of Jiang Li's head and tightly fitted his ears. Jiang Li did not have an earth attribute spiritual root or an earth attribute spell technique. However, he possessed the power of the earth vein spirit. With this high-level earth power, it was not a problem to purely activate the rock soil. Sure enough, when the rock pillar touched his ear, the chaotic sound instantly disappeared. Then Jiang Li's eyes immediately became confused. As waves of sound waves were sent back along the rock pillar, clear images immediately appeared before his eyes. Outside the hall, two teams of Jiang Li guards were doing their job. One of the guards scratched his butt in boredom. In the dungeon, the warden was still drinking his soul dissolution liquor. He looked helplessly at the youth meditating peacefully on the scorching blade. In the main city of Fengdu City, a few vendors were fighting over the ownership of a beautiful pair of yin-yang eyes. In the drunken dream death hall, Qin Shuman was acting as a chaste lady who had been tricked into a brothel. She was fighting with two mountains Wuxia. The scene expanded outside the city. The endless ground spread into the distance like undulating waves. The information sent back was so huge that, even with Jiang Li's current soul level, he was actually unable to endure it. He hurriedly called his parallel minds to maintain the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra together before receiving this information. This pair of chanting's ears indeed greatly strengthened his hearing. The range of coverage was expanded to 10 times the original limit, and the hearing limit extended to 100 times the original. One had to know that with Jiang Li's original Bodhisattva technique, it was enough to monitor a distance of 50 to 500 kilometers. Now that he had obtained the enhancement of this Earth rank artifact, he could even expand his hearing to 50,000 miles. It was a distance that he would need a long time to reach even if he flew at his fastest speed. Now he could directly hear the movement of the grass and turn it into a three-dimensional scene. Apart from that, with the help of this ear, he seemed to be able to vaguely sense the origins of certain special individuals. It was just like how the divine beast Diding could use the listening technique to identify Sun Wukong and the six-eared macaque. Although it was not as powerful as Diding, it was already a very magical and powerful ability. Unfortunately, it needed to stick its ear to the ground to take effect, limiting its usual use. Moreover, chanting's ears could only detect things on the ground. If the target was not standing on the ground, these ears would lose their effect. There were many restrictions, but no matter what, such a practical increase was enough for Jiang Li to happily take it. Try this. Jiang Li separated the stone pillar, removed the dog ear on one ear, and then pulled the dragon imprisoning lock to his ear. The dragon imprisoning lock was also solid, so it should not be a problem. Chapter 528, Long Fall 2. As the vibration spread, the sound seen in Jiang Li's mind quickly spread along with the chain. At this moment, Fengdu City had already been moved to the edge of the netherworld illusion by Jiang Li. After his vision followed the chain and circled a few times around a huge tree, he stretched out the boundary and stretched out in a straight line towards the dark void below. The endless dark void was silent, causing Jiang Li to be even more focused on exploring downwards. 10,000 miles, 20,000 miles, 30,000 miles, 40,000 miles. It was not until he was 44,400 miles away that he finally felt the other end of the dragon imprisoning lock. The dragon imprisoning lock was still extending. At the end of it was a bronze bell. It was the Maotian artifact, soul-capturing bell. Taoist Xianxia's essence soul was inside. Otherwise, if his essence soul left his body in the netherworld, ordinary people would not be able to last for so long. At this moment the soul-capturing bell began to shake, emitting a crisp sound. In Jiang Li's hearing vision, the ripples of the bell spread out. If it was as empty as usual and the sound did not collide, it would not reflect, and he would not be able to hear any echoes. However, just as Jiang Li was about to be habitually disappointed, a slight sound wave sounded. In his voice vision, the tip of the iceberg of a vast land appeared. That land was only 44 miles away from the end of the chain. Finally, I found it. At this time, Jiang Li naturally could not bear to part with that bit of spiritual qi. The pitch-black chain accelerated and quickly fell on another fragment of the netherworld. So cold. Taoist Xianxia's essence soul discovered that a layer of frost had already formed on his soul-capturing bell. Could this fragment be the location of the Backyin mountain? Xianxia did not dare to confirm because this piece of netherworld was enveloped in a terrifying black fog. When his mental strength explored it, as long as he touched it, it would corrode completely. He could not see the scene under the black fog at all. However, this can be considered to have completed the mission. Fortunately, the black fog did not cover all places. Outside the range of the fog, he successfully found a protruding rock. His essence soul controlled the soul-capturing bell to fly, and dragged the dragon imprisoning lock to fix this end to the rock. Using the indestructible dragon imprisoning lock, he connected the two netherworld fragments in the most primitive way. However, after pulling the chain around, Taoist Xianxia suddenly discovered that his speed seemed to have slowed down greatly. I only walked around once just now. Why am I so tired? For some reason, although he was only walking in circles, the dignified soul formation cultivator actually felt tired. The second round, the third, should be enough. After swaying 3 times, Taoist Xianxia's soul was already exhausted. He felt as weak as when he was a child. The soul-capturing bell drooped there. At this moment, it was on the verge of collapse. No, not yet. If I tie the knot like this, it'll loosen. The essence soul that was about to fall asleep felt a stream of spiritual qi flowing into the bell along the chain. It jolted awake a little and controlled the bell to sway as it continued to tie the knot. When he finally heaved a sigh of relief after tying the chain, he suddenly discovered that there was a strange humanoid figure curled up in the gap between the rock and the ground. Its entire body was pitch black, and its facial features were empty. This thing had always been here, but he did not sense it at all. Taoist Xianxia recalled the introduction of the Backyin mountain in his sex inheritance. It's not a famous mountain in the living world, but a dangerous place in the world of the dead. There are ghosts and monsters hidden in the brambles. There are also hidden demons on the rock cliff. The cold wind is rustling. It's the smoke coming from the divine weapon's mouth. The black fog is endless. The ghosts are secretly exhaling. This was not a place where living people should come. Just staying at the edge would be life-threatening to him. If he stayed any longer, once he lost consciousness, he would probably become a ghost. However, at this moment, a sharp cry sounded. A black fog spewed out from the 7 holes and shot towards the soul-capturing bell. Taoist Jiang Li was shocked and immediately planned to give up on the soul-capturing bell and escape with his essence soul. However, the speed that should have been able to move with a thought was actually countless times slower at this moment. Before he could escape from the bell, the black fog had already arrived. The high-grade profound rank Maotian artifact was quickly damaged by the fog and could not be used anymore. Taoist Jiang Li's essence soul was also about to be corroded by the black fog. At this moment, a purple-red energy spread down the black chain and wrapped around the bell. When the black fog touched the purple-red energy, the two slightly fluctuated, but there was not much collision, as if everything was fine. The power of the 9 Nether Usura stopped the black fog from continuing to invade, but since they were so far away, Jiang Li's control was still slow. Fortunately, other than having the effect of exorcism, this soul-capturing bell was also a life-saving artifact unique to Maotian Taoists. The spring in the bell had a special ability. It could protect the user's essence soul at the critical moment and prevent external forces from invading for 100 days. After retracting his sleeping essence soul, it immediately dimmed. The Maotian talisman on it emitted a sparkling yellow light, temporarily resisting the invasion of the strange power that was everywhere. On the other side of the dragon imprisoning lock, Jiang Li took off his chanting dog ears and stood up to stretch his back. Due to the fact that he had to provide spiritual qi at all times, he was restricted to this small area and could only meditate and cultivate. It was a little boring. Now he could move around. The black fog did not conflict with the 9 Nether spiritual qi. Instead, it seemed to have a similar origin. This meant that it was very likely the birthplace of the spiritual root of heaven and earth, the 9 Nether wood. Bakyin Mountain, the legendary place where even immortals and gods might die. How much power does it still have? Jiang Li's cultivation foundation came from the danger zone that separated the world of the living and dead. No matter what, this trip would be filled with gains. Removing the chain on his waist, he felt that it did not seem safe to only tie the end of the chain to a tree. He simply circled around twice and tied the end of the dragon imprisoning lock firmly to the Fengdu City Lord's stone monument. This place was directly connected to the earth vein. There was no place stronger than this stone monument. Then Jiang Li walked to the edge of the netherworld illusion, grabbed the dragon imprisoning lock, and directly jumped into the endless abyss below. A sense of weightlessness came. After leaving the region of the netherworld illusion, he indeed could not even fly normally. He could only pull the dragon imprisoning lock and fall along with the so-called weight of life. However, this speed did not keep increasing. After reaching a certain level, it began to maintain a uniform speed. According to the sliding speed of the chain buckle in his hand, he could determine that the falling speed was quite limited. It was roughly the level of an ordinary foundation establishment cultivator flying at full speed. The speed at which it crawled was already a distant memory to Jiang Li. Clearly, it was far inferior to his immortal slaying flying sword. At a distance of 44,444 kilometers, his speed was so awkward. It seemed that he needed to fall for a long time. It seemed that he had to find something to do in the meantime. Jiang Li's body was still falling through the void between the netherworld fragments, but his soul had already squeezed into another body. Oh, my body is so weak. On the other side of the sea, in the prosperous Ox continent, at the Royal Grace House, the sword cultivator clone lying on the hospital bed suddenly let out a weak voice. Jiang Li revealed an expression of disbelief and barely moved his fingers. As soon as he entered this body, he felt that he had to expend all his strength just to breathe. Of course, most of this was an illusion. Although the sword cultivator clone's cultivation had been stripped away, he had at least reached the soul formation realm before. He had not lost the power of his body and mind. With a little technique, it was not a problem to hammer a golden core to death. However, the difference between Jiang Li and the clone was more than 1,000 times as large. He naturally felt like a weakling. After adapting for a while, he sat up. The first thing he saw was a face that was identical to the sword cultivator clone. Chapter 529, Cultivating the Human Body 1. At this moment, his face was soaked in water, or rather, his entire body was soaked in a transparent liquid. His skin was pale, but he was clearly alive. Jiang Li dragged his heavy body down the bed and took 2 steps back. What appeared in front of him was a black beetle. This beetle was bloated, and its bulging abdomen occupied 40% of its body. Due to its overly heavy abdomen, it seemed to have almost lost its mobility. It looked more like a transparent water ball with a beetle head and 6 limbs. On the other hand, the person who looked almost identical to the sword cultivator clone that Jiang Li saw earlier was curled up in the water ball like a baby. From time to time, he would stretch his limbs and move his fingers. It was simply like an enlarged, transparent placenta. Jiang Li circled around to the front and noticed that this black beetle was using its 6 limbs to quickly pull. The basin of white sticky substance in front of it was constantly trying to eat. This was to provide nutrients for the human body in the water bag in the abdomen, so it needed to absorb a large amount of energy. At this moment, the crystal embedded in the wall began to emit light, illuminating the surrounding space and revealing the entire room. Even Jiang Li, who could already be considered knowledgeable, instinctively covered his mouth and nose. This scene was really too disgusting. It was as if he had entered an enlarged beetle nest. In this huge room, there were a total of 300 black beetles that were almost identical. Their transparent abdomens were nurturing human bodies. They were eating quickly with disproportionate limbs. That scene was enough to lower one's rationality several times. Originally, because he had stayed in this environment for a long time, his already numb sense of smell now smelled a unique, disgusting smell that belonged to insects. Jiang Li even felt that the entire body of this sword cultivator clone was smelly. In his heart, he was already considering whether he should give up on this body. Galonfren had actually reported everything that she was doing to him. He knew what was going on and had observed everything that his clone had seen. However, this disgusting scene still made his scalp go numb. The beetle automatically fed the gestation sac. It was cheap and reliable. With just a small amount of flesh and blood samples, he could nurture a body that was close to adulthood in 30 days and was almost identical to the main body. In this process, he only needed to provide some high-energy substances with balanced nutrition and clean up the insect feces regularly. The success rate was as high as 95%. This technique far surpassed the sheep placenta cloning technique in his previous life. Galonfren had actually used her own strength to create this kind of technology in the cultivation world. Although the technology was not mature yet, and could not replicate the special talent and cultivation spiritual root of the main body, it could still increase the probability of having a spiritual root according to the aptitude of the main body. The strength of an individual's body was only equivalent to an ordinary mortal. The new body would also lack souls. To Jiang Li, it was not very useful for the time being. However, after nurturing these bodies, there would still be no lack of organ tissues. For example, the food that the armored trolls needed. This was also an important bargaining chip that Galonfren used to gain the trust of the armored troll queen and exchange it for the title of Viscount. In fact, Galonfren had originally set up a flesh mountain version of the broodmother. It could give birth to thousands of individuals in one go, and then produce a large number of mature humans like the queen ant. However, that kind of thing was decisively rejected by Jiang Li. It was one thing to use a small amount of benefits to cheat research funds and obtain trust and authority. If he really took out such a thing, he would really be helping the enemy. "You're awake. How's your body recovering?" Just as Jiang Li pinched his nose and wanted to find a window here, not far away, a gentle female voice sounded, accompanied by the sound of wooden wheels moving and the friction of the ground. A woman pushing a large bucket in her hand walked towards him while feeding these beetles with a large spoon. It was a human woman in a dark blue robe who looked to be about 30 years old. She had fair skin and a gentle smile on her face. Her eyes were slightly narrowed, giving people a gentle and amiable feeling. In this era without any skincare products, at this age, many women already looked old, but this woman still looked charming. Only her rough hands told outsiders about her usual heavy work. "It's a blue dress." Jiang Li called out the other party's name. During this period of time, although his focus was not on the sword cultivator clone, what the parallel mind knew was equivalent to him knowing it himself. Human women who worked in the Grace House would usually have such a suffix in addition to their name. According to their statuses, they were divided into white, blue, and black dresses. This could be clearly seen from their clothes. Issa was wearing a blue dress, which meant that she was the manager of a certain Grace nursery home and had more than 50 human children under her. "Let me bring you out. Today is the opening day of the 6th Academy. As a new teacher, don't miss the start of school." Issa blue dress bowed to Jiang Li, and then she temporarily put down the work in her hand and brought Jiang Li out. Chapter 530, Cultivating the Human Body 2. This entire building that was as huge as a three-dimensional maze was a farm hospital. It was Galanfrin's territory. Every region was carrying out strange experiments. There were many secret laboratories that involved Usura world creatures. After obtaining the support of the armored troll royal court, her research could be said to be unrestrained. Jiang Li did not want to look at those things anymore. He looked out of the few windows in the building. The spring sun was bright and beautiful outside, and the green grass was lush. It looked like a paradise. However, it was completely different from the environment that the sword cultivator clone had seen when he first arrived in the Heian state. All the vegetation creatures here looked more like things from the Azure Cloud continent. "It's a blue dress. Do you eat nourishment too?" Jiang Li suddenly asked rudely. This Issa blue dress had been roped in by Galanfrin during this period of time. After eating the spiritual root seed, she became the only ally they had among the heads of the nursery home. What was worth noting was that she was not a pure human. "Tilda, perhaps I want to eat it sometimes, but I've never eaten it before." After thinking seriously for a moment, she answered Jiang Li very directly. On her forehead, covered by her hair, there was a thumb-sized white armor plate stuck to her skin. She was a human who had reproduced for more than 5 generations in the prosperous Ox continent. After all, the cells of the ancient Lingzhi in this land would subtly influence them through the ingredients they usually ate, the water they drank, and the air they breathed. Even without the conversion ritual, they would slowly be corroded and changed. Under normal circumstances, there would be such a change in the 3rd generation of newborns in the future. As the iteration increased, the probability would increase. This kind of person who had already grown some bone armor was no longer suitable to be eaten as nourishment. In terms of body structure, there were already many things that were different from humans. This was something that the armored trolls could not accept. Therefore, sealed farms were born. The experts of the armored troll directly used powerful methods to destroy the native ecology in the vast area. They surrounded it with towering city walls and planted the plants transported from the Azure Cloud continent to raise the creatures of the Azure Cloud continent. They forcefully changed the ecosystem in the farm, making it closer to the Azure Cloud continent. This measure successfully caused the humans in the farm to only mutate after 5 generations, and the probability of mutation greatly decreased. This, coupled with the continuous plundering at the front line of the war, could support a large number of armored troll civilians. Now, Jiang Li was about to join this farm that reared people as food reserves. After leaving the hospital, Jiang Li boarded a carriage and headed towards the 6th Academy. During this period of time, he activated the power of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra and used the wind to investigate the general situation of the entire farm. At this moment, he wished he had Shanting's ears. He did not believe that he could not find the location of the human emperor's ruins after listening to the entire farm. However, after traveling for a distance, he suddenly heard the sound of a bowstring vibrating. Then, something flew towards the carriage in a long parabola. It was an arrow with a mushroom tied to it. However, that was not a joke. Someone wanted to kill him. This was because Jiang Li knew that mushroom. It was a species from the azure cloud continent called the fire mushroom. Boom! Flames rose, and the carriage was directly blasted into pieces. If it was an ordinary person sitting inside, they would have died already. Damn outsider, how dare you treat me like this? You snatched my wife away. Unforgivable, unforgivable. On the distant hill, a man held a bow and placed a mushroom arrow on the bow. His eyes emitted a blue light as he stared at the burning carriage. Then a wave of mental power attached to the arrow, and he raised his hand to shoot. The arrow drew a long arc again, crossing more than 5,000 feet in the middle and accurately landing on the carriage wreckage. He should be dead now. He heaved a sigh of relief, packed his bow, and was about to escape. However, as soon as he turned around, he saw a handsome young man standing behind him and looking at him with interest. How incredible! That was mental strength, right? Your body is weak and you have never cultivated spiritual qi. Only your soul is strong. The mental strength released is comparable to the void core. Jiang Li stood there without a trace of dust on his body. He was still casually judging the attacker. This is impossible. How did you get here? That person looked at the sword cultivator clone in fear. He grabbed a handful of arrows and threw them at Jiang Li. There were a total of 7 arrows. They were scattered and aimless when they first attacked. However, as the blue light in that person's eyes erupted, a strand of mental strength surged out again. It pushed the 7 arrows towards Jiang Li from 7 different directions in the most primitive manner. Go to hell. 2 streams of blood flowed out of that person's nose as he roared and wanted to kill Jiang Li. Unfortunately, Jiang Li did not even move his fingers. He similarly used his pure mental strength to firmly catch the arrows, causing them to be unable to move at all in the air. In terms of mental cultivation, Jiang Li was probably not afraid of anyone. Moreover, it was only a secluded nourishment farm that had deviated from the norm. Chapter 531, Cultivating the Human Body 3. The spirit refinement cultivation method I cultivate is quite good, but there are no techniques to speak of, so this is what was taught in that academy. Let me see what else you know. Jiang Li did not care what the other party said at all. He took a few steps closer and grabbed the other party's head. The group of ghosts that had been captured by the 9 Nether Dao scripture surged into the other party's consciousness through his palm. The attacker quickly bled from his 7 orifices and trembled before losing his breath. A moment later, the ghost sent the sordid memories to Jiang Li. He roughly understood why the Grace House was special as a royal farm. That was to increase the quality of the food as much as possible to satisfy the requirements of the armored troll royal court and the other nobles. The Grace House was not like an ordinary farm that raised food like livestock. Not only would they teach words, knowledge, and etiquette, but they would also teach all children of suitable age precious spirit refinement cultivation methods. After all, that was the best way to strengthen the brain. However, without spiritual qi, and without teaching any techniques to use mental strength, all the children could not fight. Then Jiang Li's expression became strange. Earlier, he was still wondering why this attacker said that he had snatched his wife. After probing his memories, he discovered that it seemed to be true. This was because the outstanding aptitude of Jiang Li's clone was not limited to using him as material to create and nurture his body. The farm also hoped that the clone would leave as many children as possible, so that this high-quality bloodline could be passed down. Therefore, the farm decided to assign 30 outstanding women of suitable age to him. One of them was the wife of the attacker. This was the main reason why he attacked Jiang Li. From the looks of it, this was just anger caused by the hatred of snatching his wife. However, Jiang Li was no longer a fledgling qi refinement disciple. This matter might not be so simple. These few fire mushrooms were not something that ordinary people could obtain. With this attacker's strength and identity, he should not be able to obtain such a dangerous weapon. There were others who wanted to use this guy to kill the sword cultivator clone. Their goal was naturally not to target a nourishment. It was more likely that someone was afraid that Galanfrin's farm modification plan would succeed, and that might affect the interests of some armored troll nobles. Therefore, they could not wait to cause trouble. Interesting, could it be the dean of the Grace House, Shepherd Boley? Jiang Li had long known that doing things on the enemy's home ground would not be smooth sailing. He did not expect that trouble would come looking for him so quickly. The commotion of the explosion quickly attracted some attention. From the direction of the Grace House, several horses galloped over. Those people were the human patrol team of the Grace House. After all, this was a human gathering area with tens of thousands of people. It was impossible to not manage it. Looking at the few people approaching from afar, Jiang Li's eyes narrowed slightly. These guys actually cultivated spiritual qi. If one was not completely at ease, the manager of the Grace House would definitely not let them master spiritual qi. It seemed that the armored trolls would not personally come in, because they were afraid of polluting the environment inside the farm. However, this farm was still firmly controlled by them. These people who cultivated spiritual qi had already abandoned the human race and joined the trolls. Chapter 532, Back Yin Treasure Land 1. Jiang Li looked at the group of guards from the Grace House that had rushed over and thought for a moment before not going up to them. Instead, he released a ghost soldier from his hand and possessed the attacker on the ground. The attacker immediately twisted a few times and stood up. He grabbed the fiery round mushroom arrow that Jiang Li had just put away and ran towards the group of cavalry while drawing his bow and shooting. On the other hand, Jiang Li controlled his clone to slowly walk back to the pile of flames. He smeared some black ash on his body and pretended to be at a loss. On the other side, the mushroom exploded in front of the Grace House's patrol team, but it only messed up a few war horses and did not injure anyone. Then one of them abandoned his mount and rushed towards the attacker. His speed was even faster than his original mount. Another series of arrows landed, but before they could land, they were blocked by the sword lights that the person brandished. In the continent of the 9 provinces, the power of the fiery round mushrooms that only low-level rogue cultivators used was indeed limited. Soon the patrolling guard arrived. He raised his sword high, and a layer of spiritual qi light attached to it directly cut the attacker into two from head to toe. Jiang Li, who was hiding behind the flames, shook his head with a helpless expression. The situation of the humans on this continent was truly terrible. The spiritual qi cultivation of the patrol team from the Grace House was probably only at the Foundation establishment realm. The mount they had just ridden was only a mortal animal, and the weapon in their hands was a mortal weapon. Even the sword technique that the patrolling guard had just used was only a mortal martial arts technique. It seemed that even if he had already submitted to the armored troll and became a traitor, nourishment would still be nourishment, and would not be able to truly master any strength. These guards could rely on spiritual qi to maintain their combat strength at the ruling level in the Grace House, but in front of the armored trolls, they were still as powerless as infants. From the looks of it, the humans on this continent did not have a reliable source of strength. If he wanted to rely on the humans on this continent to awaken and save himself, there was no chance. What made Jiang Li more concerned was that before the patrol team attacked, they said, "He's a useless fellow who can't do anything right." It was as if he had long known what the attacker wanted to do. At this moment, the other patrols had already arrived by Jiang Li's side. "You must be the new teacher, Tang Yan. Please get on the horse. We'll bring you to a safe place." Just as Jiang Li was prepared to fight them, the guard leading the group brought Jiang Li a horse. The performance was quite respectful. It seemed that the other party was not bold enough to kill him. Without saying anything, Jiang Li rode his horse and followed them towards the buildings at the end of their vision. Grace House was a well-planned large farm community. What he saw here were rows and rows of nurseries. The architectural style was identical, and it looked like a replica. Even people who had lived here their entire lives could not find their way home without looking at the door. The existence of a large number of children caused this community to be in a noisy environment all year round, causing the pressure on Jiang Li's Bodhisattva Heart Sutra to be slightly high. Jiang Li narrowed his eyes and carefully sensed. The ratio of adults and children here was exaggerated to about 1:30. Apart from a few special professions like the patrol guards, most of the adults here were engaged in educating and raising children. Most of the adults were women. Almost all the women had just given birth or were pregnant. Being pregnant and having to raise a large number of children was a heavy job. Once the women here lost their ability to reproduce, they would immediately be chosen to be served at the dining table. No matter how well they hid it, most of the humans inside did not even know the existence of the armored trolls. However, the farm was still a farm after all. Everything was prioritized for quality and production. After passing through one courtyard after another, Jiang Li was finally sent to the newly opened academy. Inside were female teachers and students, making him feel as if he had entered a strange film set. All he had to do was play games with them. After a day of boring teaching, Jiang Li also obtained a spirit refinement cultivation method that everyone in this farm knew. Jiang Li casually threw the castrated cultivation method to the side and looked out the window in deep thought. In this farm community, there were all kinds of facilities, except for the graveyard. After all, no farm would raise livestock until they died of old age. There was naturally no reason for the graveyard to exist. However, this made the situation slightly awkward for Jiang Li. One had to know that before the sword cultivator clone left the Azure Cloud continent for the expedition, Jiang Li had yet to break through Fengdu City and control the Gate of Hell. Therefore, he did not have the token to summon the Gate of Hell. Regarding the experiments in the Usura world, they had always been communicating remotely through two parallel minds. It was a little troublesome to directly connect to Fengdu City's headquarters. Without a dense yin-qi environment, it was impossible to even open the netherworld illusion. Could it be that he had to build a graveyard himself? Half a month later, Jiang Li's main body opened his eyes. His will had already retreated from the clone. In the past half a month, his life in the farm in prosperous Ox continent could be said to be carefree. As long as he was willing, different women would take the initiative to come to his bed every day. Chapter 533, Back Yin Treasure Land 2. If it was anyone else, they would easily sink into that environment and live a drunken life. However, Jiang Li, who understood the truth, only felt sad and tormented. On the one hand, it was the humiliation of being reared. Even if it was a delicacy, when you knew that it was food, it would become tasteless in your mouth. On the other hand, there was responsibility. The more human emperor's inheritance he obtained, the heavier his sense of responsibility towards the human race slowly became. They watched as their fellow humans were raised and treated like this, in the last seclusion place of the human emperor's ancestors. As a descendant, he was furious. There had never been any lack of tribulations for humans since ancient times, but this was not a reason for them to swallow their anger. Before long, he, Jiang Li, would definitely overturn that damned continent. I won't wait long. Jiang Li exhaled and temporarily suppressed some of his thoughts before turning to look down. He had already sensed that the spirit stones in his chi si were churning endlessly, as if they were excited. After a long fall, he finally saw another netherworld fragment. He slid down the chain and gently stepped on the rock that secured the cage. First, he grabbed the soul-capturing bell. Spiritual qi surged in Jiang Li's hand, and the strange energy that corroded bit by bit was eliminated. Then he rang the bell twice, and the essence soul hiding in the spring finally woke up. After half a month, Taoist Xianxia's essence soul was much weaker than before. It was as if something was constantly consuming his strength. Taoist Xianxia did not even know what he had encountered. After thanking Jiang Li with lingering fear, he returned along the dragon imprisoning lock, leaving Jiang Li alone. The first test he had to face was a strange mental corrosion. With just a few actions, he felt exhausted and slow-witted like Taoist Xianxia. His mind and will were drowsy. He acutely sensed that the boundary of his mental world suddenly fluctuated slightly. It was as if something had run through the boundary. However, no matter how he checked, he could not see any abnormalities. It was clearly in a person's core mental sea, but there were no traces of other forces invading. This situation was very abnormal. However, before Jiang Li could do anything else, another sharp cry sounded. The black charcoal ghost hiding under the rock still did not leave after half a month. It suddenly spat out a dense black fog at Jiang Li. Jiang Li could have easily dodged this black fog with such speed, but at this moment, he seemed to be stunned as he stood on the spot without moving at all. A strange black fog approached him. The dignified successor of the great Mountain Alliance's master, the human emperor, was spat out by the black fog and fell from the rock. His head landed on the ground and he did not move at all. Only then did the coal-like ghost slowly crawl out from under the rock. Apart from the large charcoal ghost, there were also dozens of small charcoal ghosts behind him. There were so many things hidden under a rock. They were so close just now, but Jiang Li actually did not notice them at all. They crawled to Jiang Li's side, and their completely empty eyes captured the dense vitality in Jiang Li's body. The smell of vitality made the ghost tremble in excitement. Black powder and ink fell from its body. The large ghost crawled onto Jiang Li's body and used its charcoal-like hands to open his eyelids, wanting to lock his eyes and place them in his own hole. This was the unique hollow ghost of the Back Yin Mountain. It was silent and invisible. Apart from looking straight at it, it was almost impossible to detect any other probing methods. They were greedy, sinister, and vicious. They often snatched the organs of travelers when they slept and stuffed them into their bodies. It was said that Marshal Tianpeng, who had been banished to the mortal world, had his nose and pig ears stolen. It took a lot of effort to find him again. However, under the opened eyelids, the eyes were not dim. Instead, they were filled with excitement. What a terrifying ghost! A ball of spiritual qi in Jiang Li's palm transformed into the roots of the 9 nether, and it instantly coiled around the huge charcoal ghost. Then it enveloped the other small black charcoal ghosts like a tide. However, even with his casting speed, he only captured a few of them. The other small charcoal ghosts immediately turned into black fog and dissipated, fusing into the surrounding environment and could no longer be found. Jiang Li looked at the ones who fled regretfully. Then he held the few ghosts in his hand and placed them in front of his eyes. It was as if he had seen a peerless delicacy. He could not help but swallow twice. Jiang Li licked his lips, and then he grabbed a ghost and stuffed it into his mouth before swallowing it. Oh, what an exciting smell! Jiang Li's entire body shook. Immediately, the 9 nether spiritual qi surged in his entire body, and his cultivation immediately rose explosively. In the inherited memories of the 9 nether wood, the characteristics of this kind of hollow ghost were that it was very delicious, but it was very difficult to capture. The best way to capture them was to use bait. The effect of living bait was the best. If he did not have that condition, he could barely use corpses and other ordinary ghosts. Jiang Li did not expect to see such a good thing as soon as he arrived at this netherworld fragment. This was the reason why he was knocked down just now. He smacked his lips, As expected, to someone who cultivated the 9 Nether Dao scripture, this kind of hollow ghost tasted very good. Jiang Li had originally guessed this, and now that he was here, he was even more certain. In ancient times, even in the so-called forbidden area of living beings, the 9 Nether Wood was an overlord-level existence. There were many evil demons on the mountain. They were basically all on the recipe of the 9 Nether Wood and had their own uses. To him who cultivated the 9 Nether Dao scripture, although this Back Yin mountain was dangerous, there were clearly more benefits. For example, hollow ghosts, which were terrifying ghosts that could kill ordinary people if they were not careful, were rare delicacies to him. Moreover, the benefits were not as simple as increasing his cultivation and strengthening his spiritual qi. Jiang Li sensed for a moment before opening his palm and releasing a ball of 9 Nether spiritual qi. At this moment, the color of the 9 Nether spiritual qi became even deeper and more condensed. With a thought, the 9 Nether spiritual qi immediately transformed into a small ball of black fog that spun in his palm. This fog was called the Morning Nether Fog, and it was identical to the black fog that enveloped the Back Yin mountain. It could corrode a person's heart, destroy their will, and make the most determined person fall. It was one of the derivative abilities of the 9 Nether spiritual qi and the 9 Nether Dao scripture. However, because they lacked the necessary cultivation conditions, neither he nor the 2 9 Nether clones had the chance to master it. Now, by chance, he finally succeeded in cultivating it. However, now, only a small portion of the spiritual qi could be transformed into the Morning Nether Fog. Compared to the huge amount of spiritual qi in his body, it was really insignificant. After stuffing the remaining hollow ghosts into his mouth, Jiang Li was still not satisfied. If he could capture a few hundred and eat them, he could stir up a terrifying Morning Nether Fog by himself. However, this kind of ghost was just as he remembered. Due to the fact that it was empty and silent, it was too difficult to find and capture. Whether he could encounter it depended on luck. After dealing with these hollow ghosts, Jiang Li looked at the stone pillar bound by chains. A smile appeared on his face again. This place that had never been explored was great. With just 2 steps, there were treasures everywhere. In Jiang Li's consciousness, the statue clone that had been temporarily pulled over was sleeping soundly. In the parallel mind, countless dreams appeared and disappeared. The images were filled with sorrow, pain, and fear. Life was filled with suffering, and one could not extricate themselves. Under the influence of a special force, he was having all kinds of nightmares. Previously, Taoist Xianxia had been affected by this and had almost fallen forever. With the divine statue clone blocking the calamity, Jiang Li's main body's consciousness was awakened. At this moment, he was carefully stuffing seeds into the ground. As if discovering that his actions were a little strange, the tied stone inexplicably trembled slightly. Jiang Li chuckled and executed a spell technique. 18 wooden dragons immediately crawled out from the ground and surrounded the stone in the middle. It's too late to run now. Chapter 534, Dream Child 1. It was not until the plot was exposed that the stone finally understood that this strange human had long discovered it. Cracks appeared on the rock. The long, irregular rock cracked open and stretched out into 8 thick limbs. A huge rock turned into an ugly and sinister spider on the spot. This stone was alive and was disguised by a dangerous biological mimicry. It was a demon that had disappeared from the continent of the 9 provinces for an unknown period of time, a nightmare demon. This was a special spider-type demon. However, they were not weaving a spider web but a dream. The dragon imprisoning Locke's chains that had long wrapped around the stone emitted a light and began to suppress this monster that wanted to escape. However, the dragon imprisoning Locke was too long at this moment. It was more than 44,000 kilometers long. The small chain binding the nightmare demon was insignificant compared to the overall situation. As a result, the suppression effect of this small section of the dragon imprisoning Locke was better than nothing. It could only use pure physical methods to tie up a few of the other party's limbs. Then the wooden dragons that had already formed swarmed forward and bound the nightmare demon. Swoosh! A fluctuation that ordinary people's ears could not capture came from the nightmare demon's mouth, sweeping through everything from the mental level. All the creatures within the range of the fluctuation immediately heard an incomprehensible murmur in their minds, as if a strange children's song was coaxing them to sleep. Innate ability, Nightmare Whisper. The fluctuation was invisible and intangible. Even a piece of paper could not be destroyed. However, under such methods, even someone with strong resistance like Jiang Li was forced to take 3 steps back. He was in a daze. He gritted his teeth and punched himself a few times before barely managing to not fall asleep. At this moment, hundreds of illusory bubbles appeared in his mental world and floated wantonly. Every bubble here was a nightmare. Every additional one would add pressure to the mind. Once the minds relaxed, he would be pulled into a deep sleep. However, these nightmares were formed from the memories of the victim. Unless one wanted to lose these memories, it was best not to forcefully destroy them. If he wanted to break through them one by one, he had to enter them and experience these dreams that were formed from his experiences and the hardships of the world. However, the most terrifying thing was that, in a dream, humans were often unable to distinguish between dream and reality. They would also lose their usual rationality and decisiveness. It was extremely easy to sink into it. Their minds would be repeatedly tortured, and their condition would worsen. In this world, who could have a flawless mind? Even a person with great determination and wisdom would be easily confused by the heart-wrenching pain as long as they did not achieve great enlightenment. Jiang Li seriously suspected that there were definitely various dreams about his previous life in these bubbles. Once he fell into it, he would probably die. However, Jiang Li still did not seem to panic when faced with such a situation. This was because there were shortcuts to dealing with such torturous monsters. The ground in his mental world split open. Countless human-shaped tumors hung on the 9 nether roots that were buried deep underground. With a thought from Jiang Li, a large number of ghosts crawled out and took the initiative to enter those illusions. The 9 nether Tao scripture had the ability to capture ghosts to increase the strength and total amount of spiritual qi in his body. The effect was far greater than the ghost wood art he had once cultivated. From the beginning of his cultivation until now, Jiang Li had never lacked all kinds of ghosts. When he was cultivating, he had naturally refined countless ghost soldiers and ghost generals. Those ghosts crawled into the nightmare bubble and fell asleep. Without intelligence, they would only watch the dream from the perspective of a bystander and would not know what it meant to sink. Jiang Li only needed to curl the tree roots and refine them again. The illusions floating in his mental world were easily resolved by him. The 9 nether wood was the overlord of this back yin mountain. Most of these strange demons and ghosts were countered by the methods of the 9 nether Tao scripture. The 9 nether wood, which had once been countered by the ghost lantern cold flame heaven, had the advantage of having everything under control here. It was the same for the 18 demon wood dragons that were entangled with the nightmare demons. A large number of ghost soldiers were stuffed into them by Jiang Li. At this moment, the unconscious ghost soldiers fell from the wooden dragon and piled up on the ground. However, soon, as if it had used up all its strength, the strange muttering disappeared. The nightmare demon directly weakened and no longer had the strength to struggle. Jiang Li had placed a total of 18,000 ghost soldiers in the 18 wooden dragons. He still had the yin burial coffin in his hand, and he was prepared to send out a large number of ghost soldiers to consume the nightmare bubbles at any time. However, this nightmare demon had only killed more than 2,000 of them before it no longer had the strength to weave more dreams. Nightmare demons created nightmares and devoured nightmares. If they were placed in the outside world, they could easily toy with a city or even a country. Even an Earth immortal expert would fall for this monster if they were not careful. However, in the current isolated Back Yin Mountain, it was rare for nightmare demons to encounter one or two wandering souls. They were not as carefree as in ancient times. There was not much stock in its stomach. Chapter 535, Dream Child 2. Jiang Li approached the huge rock spider and looked at its ugly appearance with a very satisfied expression. With a flip of his hand, a hollow and sharp mouthpiece spear appeared. There should be some blood in such a huge spider's body. He stabbed the spear into the body of the nightmare demon. Black blood was forcefully extracted from it. It was refined and purified along the thin hole in the spear. When it dripped out of the small hole at the end of the spear, it had already turned an acceptable dark red. The broken-wing black mosquito's mouth spear innately had the ability to refine blood. After all, it was a professional Earth-rank artifact, and the effect was much better than Jiang Li's complicated actions back then. This blood was gathered into a cold jade gourd. It was not until the cold jade gourd was completely filled that he pulled out his spear and stopped. At this moment, the nightmare demon had already lost its breath. Its soul had been crushed into pieces and fused into the blood essence, dying beyond death. However, this corpse was also an excellent refinement material. Compared to subduing such an ugly spider as a beast pet, Jiang Li felt that the talent of the nightmare demon was more compatible with him. Since Jiang Li could master the ghost lantern cold flame of the ghost lantern fish, why not the nightmare talent of the nightmare demon? Previously, in order to prepare a certain plan, Jiang Li had been using the blood of madness of the Usura world creatures for a long time. Relying on the blood tattoo status one after another, Jiang Li forcefully allowed himself to possess the Usura bloodline that was close to the Lord level without changing the essence of his human race, and his affinity with the power of chaos was extremely high. It was not until now that he suddenly saw such a terrifying demon with the ability to control nightmares. Jiang Li had a feeling that the power of the nightmare demon was very useful to him. He could make an exception and cut the queue for this blood essence. After enlarging the coffin, two masked hidden rock cultivators walked out carrying a huge cauldron. This was the earth-fire cauldron left behind by the previous sect master of the 100 Tempering Mountain, Sidu Wucheng, on the night of the tragic Death City's attack. At that time, Sidu Wucheng had left it to an alchemy elder of the Sidu family. Later on, it naturally ended up in Jiang Li's hands. It had always been placed in the coffin and used by two of the best alchemists in the 100 Tempering Mountain. It was just right to use it now. Jiang Li raised his hand and beckoned, activating his dragon race talent. He condensed fog into water and filled the cauldron with black water. There was no clean water source in this Back Yin Mountain, but he could purify it again in the future. Jiang Li's palm turned into a tree root and stabbed into the black water. Soon, the black color in the water slowly faded and returned to being clear and translucent. He dipped it into his mouth and tasted it. Yes, this water was very pure. The two hidden rock cultivators immediately urged the earth fire to open the furnace, quickly boiling the water in the cauldron. Then he threw the medicinal herbs he had been carrying into it in order. Under the operation of the two alchemy masters, it was impossible for any accidents to happen when brewing a cauldron of medicinal soup. Jiang Li took out the gourd of blood essence and threw it all into the cauldron. The cauldron of medicinal liquid turned red as it boiled. In it, an ugly nightmare spider phantom could be vaguely seen. Jiang Li was not afraid of it. He took off his clothes and pressed on the edge of the cauldron before flipping in. It was like the revenge of the dead soul. A vat of beast blood surged crazily towards Jiang Li and entered his body from his limbs and bones. Then the ferocious qi in the beast blood carried the soul fragments of the nightmare demon and surged towards Jiang Li's consciousness with a ferocious aura. Nightmare demons were mental monsters to begin with. In order to obtain as much power as possible, Jiang Li had specially extracted its soul and rubbed it into his blood. This made its blood fiend abnormally powerful. A dense blood color rushed into the mental world, carrying the nightmare soul and turning into a huge spider. Logically speaking, Jiang Li's actions were extremely dangerous. When his fellow disciples condensed the blood tattoo, they were always careful and cautious. If there was a ghost lantern cold flame, they would want to use it to burn away all the mental will in their blood. How could he take the initiative to increase the difficulty? However, the taboo principles regarding cultivating the beast blood diagram might not be applicable to Jiang Li. As soon as the blood-colored spider formed, before it could bare its fangs and roar twice, it suddenly stood on the spot in a daze. At this moment, there was a large group of monsters formed from blood chi surrounding it. In front of it, the first to bear the brunt was a terrifying demon god more than 1,000 feet tall, with 800 left hands and 800 right hands. Behind the demon god were the evil eye priest, the crimson blood flood dragon, the fallen blood Xianxia, the flying head blood barbarian, and more than 10 top-notch demons of the Usura world. On both sides of it were the demon ape, dragon tortoise, vine leopard, and hundreds of other powerful demon beasts. They bared their teeth and revealed ferocious gazes, ready to devour at any time. Behind the nightmare demon, 9 ugly blood-colored ghost lantern fish swam freely. These 9 ugly fish looked the weakest, but they were the existences that could not be provoked among all the blood fiend shadows. The ghost lamp hanging on their heads was enough to let them run amok in the mental world. Unlike before, there was a strange blood-colored talisman hanging on the heads of these blood specter shadows, completely covering their faces. It was precisely because of these talismans that the blood specter shadows that were originally wandering around Jiang Li's mental world became useful to him. This was the power of the complementary body cultivation method, Blood Fiend Divine Art. After using the Blood Fiend Divine Art to control these blood fiends, Jiang Li could still temporarily fuse them into his body and switch them at any time. In this way, he could perfectly replicate the combat instincts of the Blood Fiend Phantom, allowing him to unleash the combat ability of various demon beasts and demons. It was a powerful cultivation method that was not limited to moves. Jiang Li was used to suppressing others and did not use this technique much. However, after accumulating a large number of blood fiend shadows, every time Jiang Li condensed new blood tattoos, he practically did not need to do it himself. He would let these seniors teach the junior how to be a proper beast. The Usura Lord Demon statue was the first to attack. A slap descended from the sky and turned the nightmare demon into a bloody mist on the spot. When the blood fog condensed again, it was suppressed and beaten up by the surrounding blood fiends. After being scattered countless times, it was finally completely absorbed by the mental world and turned into an obedient spider with a talisman on its head. On Jiang Li's chest, a blood-colored nightmare demon gradually formed. The 8 compound eyes on it occasionally emitted a soul-stirring dreamlike light, as if as long as one looked into those eyes, they would be entangled by nightmares for the rest of their lives. Beast Blood Diagram has successfully absorbed Beast Blood, added status, Nightmare Blood Tattoo. Nightmare Blood Tattoo. Mind Attribute plus 920, Dream Affinity plus 300, Temporary Skill Dream Weaving, Temporary Skill Dream Absorption, Cultivated Innate Physique Dream Child, Duration, 30 days minus plus. Because Jiang Li had specially fused his complete soul into the blood essence, he had inherited the talent and ability of the nightmare demon to a large extent. The power to control dreams was hidden and powerful. It was very practical. With his mental attribute and soul strength, he could display extraordinary strength with a little familiarity. Even when facing an Earth immortal expert, he could play a considerable role. However, this was not what Jiang Li cared about the most. After condensing the blood tattoo, he did not immediately get up. Instead, he focused on circulating the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra. The Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was Jiang Li's core spirit refinement cultivation method. At that time, the scripture imparting hall had passed this cultivation method to him, which probably meant that he was quite compatible with this cultivation method. However, they were only compatible. Cultivating such an ancient cultivation method needed much more than just suitability. If one was not a genius, they could forget about achieving anything. For example, when Jiang Li first cultivated it, his advancement was very fast. Although he relied on cheating, it did not take long for him to have two parallel minds. However, now, his strength was getting stronger and stronger, and his soul was becoming stronger. It was becoming harder and harder for a new parallel mind to appear. That was because he was missing a talent in his mind and soul. After obtaining the talent called Dream Child, his Bodhisattva Heart Sutra finally changed. Chapter 536, Four Hands 1. In Jiang Li's consciousness, layers of nightmare bubbles that were originally absorbed by the ghost were stripped away. After possessing the power to control dreams, Jiang Li could already easily control these ownerless nightmare energies. Moreover, these dream bubbles were all woven from his memories, so it was naturally easier to control them. One by one, they were absorbed by the three heads of the nascent soul. With this, the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra began to circulate rapidly. It was not inferior to directly retrieving a parallel mind. Dream realms were one of the many mysteries of the soul. Up until now, Jiang Li had cultivated the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra and had circulated it on its own in his dreams several times. He had used his voice to construct a world, and a magical effect similar to the essence soul leaving the body had appeared. After obtaining the dream talent and absorbing the power of nightmares, the characteristics of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra seemed to have been activated. He immediately activated it in a way that he had never seen before. Jiang Li only felt himself jumping between waking and sleeping. He slowly found the feeling bit by bit. In the end, the three pairs of eyes in his essence soul opened, closed, and closed. Jiang Li made himself feel as if he was stepping on reality and a dream. As the three heads of his essence soul yawned together, a colorful dream bubble appeared above his head. Dazzling and strange images continuously flashed in the bubble. They were unrestrained and uncontrolled. That was Jiang Li's dream bubble. It doesn't seem to be enough. The size of this bubble was clearly not enough to satisfy the extravagant Jiang Li. The ghost soldiers that had been entangled by the nightmare and were lying on the ground were attracted and surged into Jiang Li's mouth. After absorbing 2,000 ghost soldiers in one go, Jiang Li's expression did not change. As long as he had enough spiritual qi, refining the ghost soldiers that he had raised for so long was basically not difficult. The nightmare power wrapped around the ghost soldier was also continuously stripped away by the talent he had just obtained and fused into his dream bubble. The gathering of more than 2,000 dreams made the bubble larger and larger. Soon, it was enough to hold a football match inside. Then the dream bubble rose higher and higher, passing through the thick lightning clouds above and the stars above the clouds. In the end, it directly left Jiang Li's mental world and entered the mental void outside. It was similar to the mental space of the parallel mind. This was equivalent to Jiang Li having an additional dream attribute mental world. Moreover, it was the kind that could pull others in to dream together. The Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was originally a wonderful method to strengthen oneself by observing and listening to the voices of the world and comprehending the various forms of all living beings. At this moment, with his special talent, everything in the dream had become food for him to push the Heart Sutra. Apart from that, it seemed that something else could be done. With a thought, a colorful thread suddenly hung down from the dream space. On the other end of the thread was a transparent bubble-like spider. When he opened his eyes, the transparent spider had already landed in his hand. The small spider looked like a miniature nightmare demon. Due to its small size and its smooth and round surface, it did not look that disgusting. Jiang Li raised his hand and sent a dream fluctuation towards the alchemy master, who was controlling the fire beside the earth fire cauldron. How could this loyal hidden rock cultivator resist Jiang Li's methods and fall asleep on the spot? The small spider in his hand seemed to have immediately sensed the creation of the dream and automatically jumped onto the head of the sleeping cultivator. 8 transparent limbs hugged the human face and squeezed into one of his eyes. The dream spider took root in the hidden rock cultivator's dream, and then the 5-colored thread that descended from the dream bubble connected him to Jiang Li's dream bubble from afar. As the 100 tempering mountain elders' dream developed, traces of dream energy were sent back to Jiang Li's dream bubble along with the thread. Although it still looked insignificant, it could continuously provide him with strength. If there was enough, the accumulated dream power would probably be quite considerable. Apart from that, Jiang Li curled his finger, and the sleeping hidden rock cultivator on the ground was like a puppet that immediately stood up and could follow Jiang Li's instructions to do various actions. However, his eyes were still closed, and his movements were not as coordinated as ordinary people, as if he was sleepwalking. This was a new method that Jiang Li had developed through the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra and his dream talent. Dream Thread's puppet control. No matter how one looked at it, it was far from being comparable to a true parallel mind. However, the Dream Thread's puppet control was superior in quantity. Moreover, the method was relatively gentle. It did not need to possess someone like the parallel mind. After trying the new ability several times, Jiang Li was satisfied after half an hour. He waved his hand and put away the earth-fire cauldron and the 2 hidden rock cultivators. He had just arrived at this netherworld fragment and had already encountered 2 surprises. Now, Jiang Li was looking forward to the world, enveloped by the black fog. After enveloping his entire body with the 9 nether spiritual qi, Jiang Li even walked into the black fog ahead impatiently. Chapter 537, 4 Hands 2. Jiang Li had tried to use his good hearing to investigate, but he was unable to find the edge of this netherworld fragment. Its size was at least not smaller than the netherworld fragment where Fengdu City was located. Under such a large area, if he ran around like a headless fly, it would not be easy to find the mountain that separated yin and yang. However, according to the characteristics of the netherworld, the world would guide you to where you should go. As long as he walked around casually, he would be able to find it sooner or later. Following his faint senses, the unique 9 nether Dao cultivator walked forward. For 3 consecutive days, Jiang Li crawled in the pitch-black fog. He was not in a hurry to use the flying sword to travel. Instead, he walked step by step. This was because this netherworld fragment had never been developed by anyone before. It could be said to be a treasure land everywhere. Jiang Li was only walking around casually. In a moment, he could kick a few pieces of yin stone nether ore, and in a moment, he could touch a few bones. There was also the netherworld spirit grass in the cracks of the rocks, and the ghost-faced corpse leeches hiding in the cave. They were all precious materials of excellent quality. How could Jiang Li bear to fly over on his sword in such a place? It was already a sign of his determination that he did not build a house here. 3 days later, Jiang Li gradually noticed that the black fog around his body began to rise. After walking for more than 100 miles, the morning nether fog was already more than 20 feet above his head, revealing the rocky ground below. It turned out that this black fog did not completely cover the entire piece of the netherworld fragment, but hung on it like a bowl. Although the black fog covered the moonlight, there were still many plants in the netherworld that did not live by light. Not far away, Jiang Li saw a cluster of mushrooms that emitted a dim light. Although the light they emitted was weak, it was enough for Jiang Li to see. In the black fog, only ghosts and demons could survive, but in the range below the black fog, there seemed to be basic conditions that could satisfy ordinary creatures. He did not know what he could see on this land. Die. At this moment, Jiang Li suddenly heard a few unpleasant bird cries above him. In the black fog above, 2 crows flew out. After calling a few times, they turned around and darted into the black fog. The death crow that can lead the dead souls. Jiang Li's eyes lit up as he saw another precious netherworld spiritual beast. As long as he raised such a nest in Fengdu City, the range of the gate of hell would greatly increase. Without any hesitation, he stepped on the flying sword and chased after the death crow. No matter how fast the death crow was, it could not be faster than the immortal slaying flying sword. However, just as he grabbed one of the crows, the other crow collided with a huge net in the air. Once it crashed into the net, it was bound by fine net threads. The more it struggled, the tighter it became. Soon, it could not move at all. Jiang Li waved his hand and made the flying sword stop before the huge net. He snapped his fingers and relied on the echo and the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra to discover that there were actually two kites floating not far above the black fog. This huge net relied on the power of the two kites to float in the air. It was similar to fishing nets, but the fishing net was used to catch fish, while this net was used to catch birds. Haha, it's the death crow. A single death crow can feed us for 3 months. The death crow's struggle tugged at the bell, hanging below the fishing net. Below the fog, excited voices immediately sounded. Idiot crows appear in pairs. The bell only rang once. You called so loudly that the other crow was frightened away. Hurry up and pull down the net, idiot. Another voice reprimanded. It could be heard that it was not the first time the owners of the two voices had caught birds here. They seemed to be very familiar with the place. Moreover, although the voice was very powerful, it was clearly in the human language. This surprised Jiang Li greatly. There were actually humans living in the netherworld illusion. It was said that the tenacity of the human race was the best among the 100 races. No matter what environment it was, as long as there was a trace of possibility, someone would stubbornly survive. However, they even ate the crow. Which branch of the human race could be so powerful? The net at the side was pulled down. Jiang Li thought for a moment and did not hide. He stepped on the immortal slaying flying sword and slowly descended. The two voices below were blaming each other for the death crow. At this moment, when they saw Jiang Li's figure descend, the voice paused. Brother, 2 people are coming down from the sky. He's actually not afraid of the black fog. As the successor of the human emperor, Jiang Li understood the other party's dialect. However, he looked around in confusion and clearly did not see a second person. Was that guy talking about him? Moreover, when he was in the black fog, he clearly heard 2 people's voices, but there was clearly only one person pulling the fishing net below. Things were a little strange. Be careful, he might be here to snatch our bird. A second voice sounded again. The location of the voice was the same as the person pulling the net. However, Jiang Li still did not see a second person. He could only land on the ground with a little vigilance. Hello, brother, I'm a traveler passing by. That death crow is fated to be with me. Can you let it go? Chapter 538, 4 Hands 3. I can use spirit stones, medicinal pills, or food to exchange for it. Jiang Li did not rely on his strength to snatch it forcefully. After greeting them politely, he took out a few things from the coffin and placed them in front of him. There were a few high-grade spirit stones, a few bottles of profound-drank medicinal pills, and the corpses of 2 sea beasts. If it was the cultivation world, others would definitely not hesitate to choose one of the 2. However, the person in front of Jiang Li stared fixedly at the 2 sea beasts' corpses. The death crow was not a spiritual beast that specialized in size. When it folded its wings, it was about half the height of a person. In terms of size, the 2 sea beast corpses were at least 100 times larger than the crows. Moreover, birds did not like to grow fat to begin with. Compared to fat and round sea beasts, they were far inferior. In terms of meat quantity, sea beasts were indeed more cost-effective. 2 clear gulps sounded. Sir Traveler, can we test the goods first? The mature voice called brother appeared again. Due to the fact that they were closer, Jiang Li finally locked onto the source of the other party's voice. He looked at the person's crotch with a strange expression. That person was wearing a loose dress that reached the ground, but it could still be seen that something was wrong. Go ahead. Jiang Li took 2 steps back without batting an eyelid, and the other party impatiently approached the sea beast corpse. He used a small knife to dig out a small piece of meat and placed it in his mouth. "Brother, we can eat it. It's even more delicious than the flesh of the death crow." "Really? Come down and let me try it." To him, the raw sea beast meat could actually be considered delicious. Then that person did a rather strange action. In front of Jiang Li, the younger brother placed his hand on the ground and stood upright. However, it did not seem completely accurate to say that it was inverted. This was because the dress that was originally hanging down fell down along with the gravity, but what was revealed under the dress was not the foot. The hem of her dress slid down, first revealing a pair of palms covered in mud, and then thick and strong arms. Then, in next to no time, a head that looked extremely similar to the younger brother from before appeared before Jiang Li. The skirt hung down in the opposite direction, covering the younger brother who had turned around. This pair of brothers were actually conjoined from the waist up. Jiang Li held his head with a helpless expression. He had already recognized the other party's race. They were one of the ancient branches of the human race, the laborer clan's four hands. It was just like how the wind protection giant, who was famous for its strength, was also a branch of the human race. Due to the fact that Nuwa had created many strange figures when she created humans back then, the humans of the ancient times were also strange. They had all kinds of appearances and specialties. The four hands of the laborer clan were also a branch of the human race. In ancient times, they were the most hardworking model of the human race. They would always be conjoined brothers or sisters. 4 hands and 2 heads. In the day, the elder brother would work and the younger brother would sleep. At night, when they flipped over, the elder brother would work. It was a 24-hour working machine that never stopped. He did not expect to encounter the 4 hands here. That brother patted the soil on his hand and took the dagger. He also dug out a small piece of meat from the sea beast and stuffed it into his mouth. He could eat his fill, and the taste was far better than the poisonous death crow. Therefore, the elder brother immediately agreed to the deal. Under the gazes of both sides as if they were looking at fools, they completed the deal that they thought was very profitable. Chapter 539, Peak That Does Not Pierce the Sky 1. Haha, thank you, Granny Nether Mountain, for giving us food. Cough, cough, gentlemen, do you need more crows? Our village is not far away. There are still many dried crows inside. We can exchange them with you. When these 2 fellows received the food Jiang Li gave them, they had to thank that so-called Granny Nether Mountain for giving them food. Moreover, Jiang Li wanted the living death crow. What was the use of giving him the dried crow? Up until now, they still thought that Jiang Li was a 4 hands with 2 individuals like them. While Jiang Li was speechless, the 4 hands brothers in front of him started to argue again. Brother, isn't it 10 days to the village? That's not far. The younger brother, who had already switched to the bottom, exposed the truth, causing the enthusiastic elder brother's expression to be slightly awkward for a moment. Shut up, you idiot. Haha, travelers, don't listen to his nonsense. My name is Xianxia. This is my younger brother, Xia. Our village is the most enthusiastic and hospitable 4 hands village in this area. We will definitely satisfy you. The brother called Xianxia tried his best to invite Jiang Li to follow them back to the village. Clearly, the deal just now made them very tempted. When trading with Jiang Li, 1 caddy of unpalatable meat could be exchanged for 50 kilograms of delicious meat. This kind of bargain was simply even more unbelievable than a free lunch. Moreover, the traveler who completed the deal did not seem to have any intention of going back on his word. Such a fat sheep might not be encountered in hundreds of years. They naturally did not give up easily and wanted to continue taking advantage of Jiang Li. Both sides looked at benefits from different angles, so Jiang Li naturally did not have anything to be dissatisfied about. In this transaction, the benefits he obtained were also more than 100 times. Moreover, it was not easy to encounter a group of humans here that could communicate. It was probably more efficient to get some information from them, than to walk around alone. Just call me Jiang Li. I indeed still have a lot of that kind of meat, and I'm very willing to continue trading with you. In addition, I'm looking for the back Yin Mountain. Have you heard of it? In the end, Jiang Li did not introduce his little brother to them. After casually agreeing to continue the transaction, he asked about the location of the back Yin Mountain. He had only asked casually and did not expect to really gain something. Back Yin Mountain. Sir Jiang Li is also going to pay respects to Granny Nether Mountain. Not only had Xianxia and Xianxia heard of the name of the back Yin Mountain, but they also seemed to be very familiar with it. After misunderstanding that Jiang Li had the same faith as them, they spoke much more intimately. Does Granny Nether Mountain also protect Mr. Traveler's village? Our village is on the edge of the back Yin Mountain. When we return, we'll prepare to participate in Granny Nether Mountain ceremony. Sir Jiang Li and your brother can participate with us. The other party invited Jiang Li enthusiastically again. This time, he already had a reason that he could not refuse. Granny Nether Mountain was a term that Jiang Li had never heard of. It should be the name of a powerful demon or a ghost. There were no tigers in the mountain now. It was unknown who had occupied the back Yin Mountain that was filled with demons and ghosts. With the two sea beasts that Jiang Li had traded with them, Xianxia and Xianxia had already completed their hunting goal. They pushed a small cart with a wheel and had to transport tens of thousands of kilograms of sea beasts back to the village. However, the simple wooden carriage shook 3 times with every step. It creaked and looked like it was about to fall apart at any moment. The speed was abnormally pitiful. As everyone knew, in places with dense yin qi, meat was usually not easily corrupted. Instead, it was easy to become stiff like zombies. To ordinary humans, this might be much more terrifying than corruption. However, to the tenacious four-hands humans, stiff meat was probably like dried meat. Therefore, there was no need to worry about the meat of the sea beasts being spoiled during the transportation. As long as they transported the meat back to the village, they could marry a pair of wives and live for a few years without worry. However, this slow speed made Jiang Li, who was following at the side, very dissatisfied. According to the speed at which this tortoise crawled, by the time they brought Jiang Li to a place, the Blood King might have already successfully brought people back to the country. Helpless, he could only help them again. He reached out and used the demon awakening technique. A 9-nether spiritual light enveloped their wooden cart. This cart that had been used for 20 years had been transformed by Jiang Li into a powerful wood demon that could carry things on all fours. The wood demon carried the 2 sea beasts and easily ran forward. On the other hand, while Jiang Li followed the wood demon, his eyes were still scanning his surroundings, and he took everything that caught his eye along the way. When the four-hands brothers sitting on the wood demon recovered from the wonder of the demon awakening technique, they saw Jiang Li's figure flash rapidly around them. From time to time, he would pick up a few ordinary rocks and pull out a few weeds that could not be eaten. Both of their heads were thinking that this traveler from nowhere had magical abilities and a large amount of food. It was just that this hobby of picking up trash was really hard to understand. However, in fact, the four hands which were isolated from the world were only the laborers of the human race. They had not inherited the profound theories of medicine and the pill cauldron techniques. Chapter 540, Peak that does not pierce the sky too. Therefore, they did not understand the benefits of these precious natural treasures at all. They were ignorant and looked down on the world. However, this also made their minds active. These useless things were everywhere. If they could use these things to exchange for food, wouldn't they make a killing? With the help of the wood demon, the 10-day journey took less than 2 days. Under the guidance of the four-hands brothers, Jiang Li quickly saw a small village that was only about 100 households in the distance. At this moment, what attracted Jiang Li's attention was a huge mountain range that was strangely shaped and mostly enveloped by the black fog. Was that the back Yin Mountain? That village was different from the backward mortal villages Jiang Li usually saw. Although there were not many large houses, the residences were all made of smooth rocks. Every carving on it was exquisite and meticulous. Clearly, it had taken a lot of effort. After getting closer, he could already hear dense breathing. In the village, everyone, from the old to the children, was working hard. From time to time, there would be people walking around with rocks that were as tall as a few people. As the Four Hands Labor Clan, they were born with abundant energy and stamina. They were the type that could not stop all day long. If they really had nothing to do, they would even tear down the house and rebuild it. At this moment, they were building a temple that was as huge as a palace. The entire village was mobilized, and their progress was astonishing. It was clearly a village of a few hundred people, but when they worked, they displayed the efficiency and aura of more than 10,000 people. The arrival of the wood demon quickly attracted the attention of the other busy people in the village. At first, they thought that it was an attack from demon beasts. Everyone picked up their weapons and rushed out. The weapons flickered with a cold light. Clearly, they were not ordinary. The members of the labor clan also did not have the talent or inheritance to refine weapons. These weapons were only forged like mortals, and there were no runes or spirit carvings on them. However, due to their astonishing endurance and work desire, the heavy work of forging iron was a limited outlet for their energy. As a result, the weapons in their hands were only made with mortal techniques. Any weapon with 100 refinements could be considered a divine weapon of the current mortal era. It required the efforts of a craftsman. The weapons in the hands of these Four Hands were all above 10,000 refinements. Coupled with the excellent quality of the ores produced from the netherworld fragment, they used the most ordinary techniques to refine weapons that were comparable to spirit artifacts. Wait, village chief, it's us. On the wood demon, Xianxia and Xianxia went to greet the villagers below, stopping their brandishing swords. After dragging the two sea beasts and explaining to them, the villagers immediately put down their weapons and warmly welcomed Jiang Li. Alliance leader Jiang was brought to the house of the Four Hands village chief. He was invited to eat the best food here, the eyeballs of the death crow. It was said that the eyeballs of the death crows had the power to see death. After eating their eyeballs, one could avoid the invasion of death to a certain extent. Of course, Jiang Li, who pinched his nose and ate the eyeball, could very responsibly say that this was simply a rumor. He did not even gain a useful buff. Instead, there was an additional negative status called intestinal discomfort. Even with Jiang Li's resistance, he felt a little uncomfortable. However, this group of Four Hands could eat it for a long time. Their vitality was truly shocking. Then, a long line formed at the entrance of the village chief's house. The Four Hands took all kinds of things to exchange for the flesh of the sea beast with Jiang Li. There were all kinds of handmade pots and pans, netherworld creatures captured in the past, and beautiful rocks that children casually picked up by the roadside. Jiang Li practically did not reject anyone. According to the results given by appraisal, he more or less generously distributed the meat to them. The villagers gradually discovered that this traveler seemed to be especially interested in the animal bones that could be seen everywhere in the wilderness, and a cold and useless rock. Therefore, before Jiang Li left, they took the initiative to start searching the nearby area. Some smart Four Hands even became his traffickers. They used a smaller amount of sea beast meat to run to the other Four Hands villages to exchange for more things before exchanging them with Jiang Li. Jiang Li's arrival made this village of a few hundred people visibly rich in a short period of time. Every family's door was hung with dried meat strips. This food was enough for them to raise more descendants and develop their village. With their efficiency, all kinds of netherworld specialties quickly piled up in his coffin. However, under such circumstances, they still did not give up on building the temple. As the temple was completed, it was time for their worship ceremony to begin. The surrounding dozen Four Hands villages began to form groups and walk towards the distant mountain range. The people from the surrounding Four Hands villages quietly gathered together, as if they were still discussing in secret how to bring Jiang Li, a living treasure box, to their village. Soon, the team of thousands of people arrived at an obvious border. They did not cross the border. They set up sacrifices and began to worship the mountain. Jiang Li noticed that on this side of the border it was still a flat stone plain, but on the other side it had become densely packed with sharp stalagmites. He picked up a rock on the ground and threw it across the line, but the expected parabola did not appear. This ordinary stone that he had not injected any spiritual chi into flew higher and higher against common sense. After drawing a reverse arc, he finally plunged into the black fog that forever covered the sky and was thrown into the distant void. Jiang Li was extremely familiar with this kind of power. In any case, it was his inverted domain. However, at the very least, the rules of the domain were not completely reversed in the area of the earth spike rock bamboo. In the area of the stone spikes in front of him, only the top and bottom were reversed. As long as one took a step into it, it would not be as simple as stepping on the stalagmite. Instead, the world would reverse. One had to grab the stalagmite that was extremely difficult to grasp and drag themselves forward. Once he failed, he would fall into the morning fog sea and finally fall into the void, dying there alone. The Baekyin Mountain is a place with pure yin and no yang. It has many bumps and is even more rugged. Therefore, there is no grass on the mountain, no mountains that pierce the sky, no guests on the mountains, no caves that accept clouds, and no streams that flow. This was the so-called peak that did not pierce the sky. From the outside, it was undoubtedly a mountain. However, after entering, in the eyes of others, this was a huge mountain hanging upside down on the ground. At this moment, thousands of people had already completed the first step of the ceremony. Then the elders in the villages stood up. They ate the prepared food in front of everyone. Then they tied waterproof leather bags to his waist and walked towards the dangerous stalagmite area. The trees he had seen before were also inside. This was one of the most important procedures in the four-hand ceremony. What was in their leather bags was oil extracted from living creatures. This was originally very precious food, but at this moment, these young people had to cross the dangerous reversed stalagmite area and throw the oil into a brazier at the foot of the mountain. The first young man in the village to light the brazier would become the leader of all the four hands before the brazier on the altar was extinguished. This naturally made the young people of the four hands yearn for it. Soon, a pair of young four hands brothers took the lead. The hands below tentatively grabbed the stalagmite in front of them. After confirming that they had grabbed it, they began to swing forward step by step. The other young people were also unwilling to fall behind. Some held onto their hands at the same time, while some of their brothers took turns to move forward. The young people displayed their abilities. At this moment, Jiang Li, who was a bystander, also stepped into the stalagmite area ahead.